The Tabernacle of David, Burnsville, Minnesota presents a special video production. Andrew Gabriel Roth. Give my peoples their history back.
So this next teaching is called Give My Peoples Their History Back. Now, these things look kind of weird, I know. I'll just explain what those things are, why I have them on the cover here, although I'm not talking about these things per se. But these are images from a teaching I did called The Lost Biography of Peter. And in that teaching, we saw archaeological evidence that Peter is buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, not in Rome. That was basically what this was. And so this is an inscription that says Shimon Bar Yonah in Aramaic there. And it was frequented, this tomb complex also had buried with Peter Martha, Mary, and Lazarus here. It was dedicated to Yeshua here. And we know Gentiles went to this pilgrimage place because they placed a little bit of evidence here. And a lot of that is mostly not known. And that's the point. There's a lot of history we're missing. Give my people their history back. So let's begin. Got one question to ask. What was the Bible for Yeshua, the Messiah, and the apostles? Right? There we go. Tanakh. You see that last word, Israel, has a comma because there's a catch there. Same Tanakh or Old Testament shared by the Jewish brothers in Israel, but there was no New Testament as a fixed book as we understand the term today. Same is true of terms like communion, bishops, churches, a whole bunch of them. So sometimes when I'm talking about this, I'll say, the only issue with talking about the New Testament church is there was no New Testament and there was no church. Other than that, no problem. So let's get our history back. From Adam to the call of Abraham. From the time of Adam, there have always been people who are set apart by Elohim for his great purpose. Their names are remembered in Scripture as Adam, Seth, Enoch, Noah, and a lot of other people. What made them worthy of remembrance? Righteousness and personal struggles against sin. Pretty basic, I think. Adam and Enoch walked with Father Yah directly. Noah also walked with Father Yah and was declared righteous and perfect in his generation. And for 19 generations, there were no ethnic designations or classifications for any of the biblical people. Not once. They were simply human beings who heard the voice of Elohim. And then came Abraham in the 20th generation. Messenger of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time from the heavens and said, By myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, that because you have done this, and you have not withheld your son, your only son, that I will bless you. I will certainly increase your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore. And let your seed possess the gates of their enemies. And in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Why? Because you're Hebrew? No. Because you obeyed my voice. And Yahweh appeared to him and said, Do not go down to Mitzrayim, Egypt, to live in the land which I command you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For I give all these lands to you and your seed. and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I will increase your seed like the stars of the heavens, and I will give these lands to your seed, and in your seed, meaning through Isaac, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Why? Because Abraham's a Hebrew? No. Again, not because he's a Hebrew, but because Abraham obeyed my voice. He guarded my charge, my commands, my laws, and my Torot, which is the plural of Torah. So we next look at to go from Abraham to the Jews and Gentiles up to in the time of Messiah in the first century. And I shall make you, Abraham, a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you, and curse him who curses you. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed. Here's my key point. This is the takeaway, you might say. There were no Hebrews before Abraham. No Israelites before Jacob. And no Jews before Jacob had his fourth son, Judah. That is a scriptural fact. And once more, going back to the first generations of the apostles, no fixed book called the New Testament or the Renewed Covenant or any of the names that we use today. The children of Israel set out from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot besides the little ones. And a mixed multitude went up with them too, and flocks and herds and very much livestock. The word in Hebrew, erev rav. Erev refers to a mixing of light and shade. Okay? We sometimes call that sunset. Right? Erev Rav, Erev Shabbat. Right? So that means multiple shaded people, from black to white and everything in between, came up with the Hebrew people out of bondage in Egypt, including a few Egyptians. And certain foreigners, lest we think that, oh yes, it's all about Abraham's line and all the foreigners are bad. Certain foreigners get certain privileges that others don't. Like, for example, do not loathe an Edomite, for he is your brother. And do not loathe an Egyptian, because you were a stranger in his land. The children of the third generation born to them enter the assembly of Yahweh. Compare that to a Moabite. 10 generations by one verse, never by another verse. This is a big deal about the Moabites here, because they're the incestuous offspring of Lot and his elder daughter. Right? What do you mean? If they happen to come up with the Israelites out of Egypt, then you would wait 3 generations before an Egyptian or an Edomite would be able to enter into whatever shrine they had. You're anticipating me. I have an advantage. I wrote this. Okay, so I might be in a position to know that I'm kind of getting to that. Well, Ruth did something very special. Ruth and Boaz. See, the very next point of the next slide, Ruth married a Jew and was counted to his tribe. That must be true. You know why? Because if a Moabite cannot enter the assembly for a minimum of 10 generations, then Solomon can't enter into his own temple. But fortunately for Solomon, Ruth became part of Judah. So no problem. So if Ruth became Jewish when marrying Boaz, what happens when the church says they want to be the bride of Christ? Think about it. Hebrews 13:8 says that Yeshua is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if he was Jewish then, thank you, he's Jewish now. So what happens when the church marries a Jew? Same thing that happened to Ruth. And by the way, if the Torah is only for us Jews, why does Jonah go to Nineveh in the first place? Just saying. Last time I checked, they didn't check your ethnicity when the flood came. Right? It seemed that everybody got judged by the same standard. And that's why the renewed covenant scriptures read the way they do. That the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles. See that? Surprise! Blessing of Abraham comes to the Gentiles through Yeshua the Mashiach, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. My brothers, I speak as a man. Even though it be a man's covenant, yet if it is confirmed, no man can reject it or change anything in it. Oops. You see the problem? Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his seed as a covenant. He did not say seeds as of many, but seed as of one, that of the Mashiach. I made sure to put in Galatians because I can't tell you how many times pastors have said, I dare you to quote from Galatians. I'm like, okay. Be careful what you wish for. And by the way, the only curse of the Torah is in breaking it, not keeping it. Deuteronomy 28 kind of gives a few examples. Yeah. Boy, that blessings part just goes like that. And by the time you get to the end, you've forgotten the good stuff at the start of the chapter. Wherefore, Paul says in Romans. Now, I love quoting from Romans. First of all, because Romans is a very Jewish book. That's first of all. And secondly, because I always like to ask, does it get more Gentile than the Romans? I mean, could you imagine a greater poster child for Gentileness than the Romans? So if there's Jewish stuff going to the Romans, it's kind of going to everybody, isn't it? And that's what Paul says. It is by faith, which is by grace, that we are made righteous, so that the promise may be sure to all the seed, not to only that which is of Torah, but to those which is of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of what? Us all. But Yeshua said, if you were the children of Abraham, you would do the deeds of Abraham. And what are the deeds of Abraham? Do I have to bring up Genesis 26:5 again? He kept my Torah, my mishpatim, my ordinances, and my laws. But Yeshua has a shortcut for the Gentiles that may be skeptical about this. You're not sure about Abraham? Join my family. Just join my family and you'll get all them too. That's all you got to do. Many will say to me in that day, my master, by your name have we not prophesied? By your name have we not cast out demons? And by your name have we done many miracles? And then I will profess to them that from everlasting, I have not known you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. For anyone who does the will of my Father who is in heaven is my brother, my sister, and my mother. So if you do the will, you get to be in the family. Isn't that what it says? Messiah never says, if any of you Jews do the will of my Father, you'll get in the kingdom. You Gentiles don't bother. You just keep the Noahide laws. Does he say that? No. But rather, anyone who does the will of his Father becomes a part of his family and his tribe. Well, we didn't think about that, did we? And Yeshua cares about the Gentiles. For example, he says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, pretenders who please only men, which is my new translation for the word that is usually hypocrite. That's coming in the new translation, right? Because a hypocrite is an actor who plays a role on the stage. Jews don't exactly go out to the theater a lot in the first century. It's kind of forbidden. So, but it would actually be face takers is what the Aramaic says. In other words, you are pretenders. You take your original face away and you put a false pretend face instead. That's pretty powerful. Pretenders who please only men. Because you traverse the sea and the land. So if you're going outside the land of Israel, guess who you're going to talk to? Gentiles. So that you might make one proselyte. And when he's become one, you make him double the son of hell that you are yourselves. So again, that's why I say he cares about Gentiles. Kind of comes first gospel there. He reaches out to Samaritans when no one else would reach out to Samaritans. They're the extended family. Sort of Jewish, sort of Gentile. And he reaches out to Romans. He forgives one of them who's putting the nails in his flesh. I mean, you want to talk about an international program. Okay? And of the Gentiles overall, Yeshua says, I am the good shepherd. And I have other sheep, those who are not from this sheepfold. And also them, it is necessary for me to bring them, and they will hear my voice. And the flocks will become one, and there will be one shepherd. Right? We've read this a million times, haven't we? Who are the people in the current sheepfold? Jewish people. So if they're from the other sheepfold, where are they from? They're the Gentiles, aren't they? And he says, they're going to come from far away. They're going to hear my voice. And they will all be under one shepherd. Which means Gentiles, you're not going to keep doing your own thing either. That's the parable of the prodigal son. The younger one who goes a-whoring, it's the Gentiles. The older one who's resentful and says, you wouldn't even let me kill a goat for my friends, and now you're going to kill the fatted calf for him. That's Judah. Right? Neither of them come across pretty well in that parable. Unfortunately, their father is Yahweh, who sets the whole thing straight. So, the sources the apostles used, first and foremost, First Covenant, Old Testament scriptures in Hebrew. Then, as people like Peter and Paul went around, you may have noticed that the word gospel is always singular. You'll never hear Peter or Paul say, the Gospels say. Never. It's the gospel of the kingdom. Or it's the gospel of the Messiah. Or it's the gospel of Elohim. Because each audience has a different oral teaching that they've been rolling out. See? And so, because they were native Aramaic speakers, guess what language that rolls out in most of the time? It's going to be in Aramaic. It's going to be in Greek too. But it's going to take a while to get those translated ones out. Then you get written accounts in Aramaic. Each apostle writes their own travel diary. Luke kind of writes a travel diary in the middle of the story. Paul writes one letter to Corinth and has no idea there'll be a second one. Right? Peter says, you know what? I've seen some of Paul's letters and they're hard to understand. The ones I've read. Right? So this circulates very slowly. 20 years, 30 years. But any other reference? It's the Tanakh. So we need to understand what Scripture is to the apostles and how they viewed that Scripture. So the apostles have a lot to say on truth and error. I like this one from Jude. Encouraging you to maintain a conflict for the faith which was once delivered to the set-apart believers. See that? So Jude, stepbrother of Yeshua, says, go to war. Fight for your faith. Don't be complacent. Don't compromise. That's what he says. And the synagogue of the Jews, and during 3 Shabbats, Paul spoke with them from what? The Tanakh. Expounding and showing that the Mashiach was to suffer and rise from the dead. He proved it from the Tanakh. And those, by the way, he's speaking to Jews. Those are the Bereans. And Paul says of himself, I'm a man who is a Jew. I was born in Tarsus in Cilicia, was brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, and instructed perfectly in the Torah of our fathers. And I was zealous for Elohim, as you also are. And Paul cried out to the assembly, men, brothers, I am a Pharisee. Present tense. Not I was a Pharisee, and then the Damascus Road set me straight, and now I'm having a BLT with y'all. Right? I am the Pharisee, and the son of a Pharisee, and for the hope of the resurrection of the dead, which, by the way, you Sadducees don't believe in, shame on you, I am judged. Meanwhile, Paul said he committed no offense against the Jewish Torah, or against the temple, or against Caesar. So where's Paul making a new religion here? Nowhere. This is one of my favorites. Paul speaking of his faith. This thing I indeed acknowledge in the same doctrine which they speak. I do serve the Elohim of my fathers, believing in how many things? All the things written in the Torah and in the prophets. No law passing away here. Which they all, and I have a hope in Elohim, which they also expect that there is to be a resurrection of the dead. Here's another one. And now the hope of the promise which was made to Elohim, for all those who want to track the tribes, right? I stand and I am judged. To this hope our 12 tribes hope to come. All of Israel. With earnest prayers by day and night. And for this same hope, King Agrippa, who by the way is Jewish, I am accused by the Yehudians. How do you judge the matter? Are we not to believe that Elohim will raise the dead? Got to get in Yaakov. Everyone who looks upon the perfect Torah of liberty and lives fully in it is not to be a hearer to be forgotten, but a doer of things. And he will be blessed in his work. Torah, a good thing. And here's a really nice one at the end of Acts, almost the last line of Acts. They appointed him a day, and many assembled, and came to Paul at his lodgings. And he explained to them Again, the Romans, right? What does he do to the Romans? He says, respecting the kingdom of Elohim and testifying and persuading them concerning Yeshua out of the Torah of Moshe. So all the attempts to say out of the law, don't even try it. It's the law of Moshe. It's the Torah. And out of the prophets from morning until evening. And in Galatians, again, I am stunned into silence as if dead. The Aramaic actually parses out as dead of speaking. I am dead of speaking. That you have so quickly forgotten the Mashiach who's called you to his grace, and you've gone after another gospel. That doesn't exist. Already, within 30 years of the resurrection, there's a fake gospel. Elsewhere, Paul will call it a strong delusion that they will believe a lie. A false gospel about a false Messiah. But there are men who agitated you and desired to pervert the good news of Mashiach. And he's so worried that even Satan will send demons that look exactly like Paul. So even if you think I've come back to give you, he says, for if us, even a messenger from heaven, preach outside of what was preached to you, let them be cursed. As I said before, I say it again, whichever man preaches to you outside of what you have received, let him be accursed. Don't even take my word for it if I change my mind. And they profess that they know Elohim, but in their works they deny him. And they are odious and rejectors of every good work. A heretical man, after you have instructed him once and then again, avoid, and know that such a man is perverse and sinful, because they're going away from the Torah. This should tell us something. There's not a book in the renewed covenant that doesn't say the original followers were Torah observant. That is a fact. Here's one. This is one of my favorites. For the time will come when they will not give ear to sound teaching, but will, according to their lusts, will multiply themselves teachers in the itching of their hearing, and will turn away their ears from the truth and incline after fables. I think that's still going on. Yeah. What would those fables be? Fables that come outside of the scriptures. These are fables. Or wicked men that pervert the grace of Elohim to impurity and deny him who's the only Lord, Elohim, and our Master Yeshua the Mashiach. And he says, my children, so there are now so many false messiahs. From us they went out, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out from us so that it might be known they were not of us. 1 Yochanan. Remember, they went out from us because that prophecy would be fulfilled within a short-term amount of years. There would be people who said, I was taught by the Apostle John. Right? And then they would proclaim a doctrine that John never taught. Right? And we know this because early church history tells us this is exactly what happened. We know their names. Ignatius was a disciple. And he clearly did not get that information from the apostle. And others who followed after him. Whereas the real disciples of John, guys like Papias, guys like Polycarp, they were Torah observant. And here's Yaakov again. But if bitter envy be in you, or contention in your hearts, do not exalt yourselves against the truth and do not lie. For this wisdom comes not down from above, but is earthly, and from the devices of the soul, and from demons. The false gospel, the lie. And my beloved, I now write to you, that you may be mindful of the words which were formerly spoken by the set-apart prophets, and of the commandment of our Master, that there will come in the last days scoffers who will scoff, walking according to their own lusts, being reserved for the fire at the day of judgment and at the destruction of wicked men. 2 Peter. I think I've ticked off a number of these books to show this theme. But what the other thing that we find out is that the Gentiles will take over for a while, but not forever. This is what the church actually tells us, how they took over. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia. So, on the ruins of Jerusalem, a new Roman city was built, called Aelia Capitolina. And a temple to Jupiter Capitolinus was built on Mount Moriah. No Jew, and therefore no Jewish Christian, was allowed under pain of death inside the town. This brought about a complete change in the circumstances of the Church of Jerusalem. The old Jewish Christian community came to an end, and in its place, a church of Gentile Christians with Gentile bishops was formed, who depended much less on the sacred memories of the city. Okay, so they're explaining, they're thumping their chest a little bit. But look what they just admitted. The Jews came first. Didn't they just admit it? They replaced the Jews who were there. And then they not only replaced, they transformed what they saw into what they wanted. Because again, they're starting to get into that. Who depended much less on the sacred memories of the city of Jerusalem. Depended much less on Torah, on the feasts. And then Aelia was a town of no importance. Jerusalem was no importance in the empire. The governor of the province resided at Caesarea in Palestine. And as the rank of various sees, that's what they call assemblies, among themselves, was gradually arranged according to the divisions of the empire, Caesarea became a metropolitan. That's a major church hub. Like 100 churches will report to a metropolitan. And the bishop of Aelia was merely one of its subordinates. So says the Catholic Encyclopedia. Now Eusebius says something else about the original religious makeup of Jerusalem and the Christians, or the Messianics, if you prefer. He says, the chronology, he's writing in the 4th century, the chronology of the bishops of Jerusalem I have nowhere found preserved in writing. For tradition says they were all short-lived. Well, that's certainly true. But I've learned this much from the writings. So apparently there were these other writings that Eusebius found. Eusebius talks about getting information from the Jerusalem library before it was destroyed. There was another library at Caesarea. He was in charge of Caesarea. He was the bishop of that city. He got that library. And he got lots of information from as far away as a place called Edessa in Turkey. He says, I got Aramaic documents from Edessa and I translated them into Greek. So he says, I've learned this much from the writings, that until the siege of the Jews, which took place under Hadrian, there were 15 bishops in succession there, all of whom were said to have been of Hebrew descent, to have received the knowledge of Messiah in purity. so that they were approved by those who were able to judge of such matters and were deemed worthy of the episcopate. For their whole church consisted of believing Hebrews. Whole church, believing Hebrews, who continued from the days of the apostles until the siege which took place at that time, in which siege the Jews, having again rebelled against the Romans, were conquered after severe battles. But since the bishops of the circumcision ceased at this time, it's proper here to give us a list of their names from the beginning. In other words, it's not going to take a long time because they weren't there that long. James, the so-called brother of the Lord. The second one, Simeon. Justus, Zacchaeus, Tobias, Benjamin, and so on. The last one, kind of ironically, is Judas. These are the bishops of Jerusalem that lived between the age of the apostles and the time referred to, all of them belonging to the circumcision. That's the real truth. They changed it. They admit that they changed it. They said they had the right to change it. And they said they'll change it again. I mean, that's about as Catholic a source as I could give, isn't it? So, I'm being fair. I'm trying to be as fair as I can. It was during the 2nd century then that the Jewish influence waned. The Torah influence waned, giving rise to the Gentile church that we see today. That's a fact. But here's a little bit of a twist. The original Jerusalem assembly will return. Because Revelation tells me so. And the dragon was enraged against the woman, and he went to make war upon the remnant of her seed. Who's the remnant of her seed? Jews, right? Who keep the commandments of Elohim and have the testimony of Yeshua. And how about this? And I saw a new heavens and a new earth, for the former heaven and the former earth had passed away. And the sea was no more. And I saw the set-apart city, the New Jerusalem, descending from Elohim out of the heaven, prepared like a bride. There we go again. Like a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice from heaven which said, Behold, the tabernacle of Elohim is with men, and he dwells with them, and they will be his people, and Elohim will be with them, and Elohim to them, and every tear will be wiped from their eyes. And there will no more be death, nor mourning, nor wailing, nor pain be any more, because the former things have passed away. So we were there, we weren't there, we're back. And finally, blessed are they who do Master Yahweh's mitzvot, or commandments, that they may have a right to the tree of life and may enter into the city. So, what was has come back again. All of you are proof that this prophecy is happening right now. Every single one of you. Every single Torah observant person, whether Jewish or Gentile, whether in the church or outside from the church, or even no church at all. They're just opening their house for Shabbat. Every single one of them are doing the commandments of Elohim and the testimony of Yeshua, the Messiah. So we're all a part of that restoration. We are back where we started, when Jews and Gentiles worshiped in the temple. When Jews and Gentiles like Cornelius were going to synagogue and getting translated services into Greek. When Yeshua says he comes to knock down the dividing wall, he's not going to say that temple worship is equivalent to pagan worship. He never said that. When Paul says that, he doesn't say that. He says they will knock down the dividing wall in the temple between the Jews and the Gentiles so they can come into Torah together. It was, then it wasn't, and now it has come back again. Believe it. And you know, I'll just close with this thought. When Colossians says that keeping the new moon and the feast by the Gentiles are shadows of things to come, those shadows are not about Yeshua, because Yeshua had already came and resurrected 30 years before Colossians was even written. The shadows of things that are to come is this. There are a few of you Gentiles who are keeping Torah, but by the time we're through, there's going to be a whole lot more of you, because all nations are going to stream into Zion and worship Yahweh of hosts at the Feast of Tabernacles. It's going to happen. So that when it happens, you'll know I told you about it in advance, because the scripture tells us about this. That's our future. That's what we have to look forward to. Jews and Gentiles together and coming to Messiah through Torah, and Gentiles coming in through the Judah gate because they have married a Jewish king. Amen.
For more information, visit onefaithonepeopleministries.com.